We're going to be talking about lightwork systems. This is the philosophy of absolute freedom, in my opinion. Now, let's get real clear on what I mean by absolute freedom, and if you're actually going to resonate with this. What I view as absolute freedom is both external freedom and internal. So often people come to me, they might have external freedom, right? They're doing really well with their business. Maybe they can live anywhere they want. They have the financial capacity to do that, right? And they can feel free in pretty much any country they're in because of that. But maybe they have, trouble internally where they feel trapped, they feel constrained by their calendar, they feel just stressed, a lot of resistance, most of the day. And so this is an example of having a lot of external freedom, but not necessarily having the internal freedom. The other version is someone might feel very free in themselves, right? They might feel like they've got an amazing internal experience, wonderful, but they may be resisting getting their external reality in check, right? This is a lot of people who come to me where they've done a lot of inner work, but they feel a real heavy resistance to actually going back to their business, right? Or continuing with their sales career, whatever it was. And so that's an example of having maybe the internal freedom, but still having a little bit of that resistance to continuing and having it externally as well, right? And we want to have both so we can feel really in deep harmony all day, but especially within our work, right? Within the thing that's actually going to create external freedom as well. We don't want to have one or the other, we want to have both, because then we get to live a truly liberated life. Now, the second part of this is we want to remove the fix-it mentality. A lot of inner work, I find, is all about fixing the next problem, fixing the next shadow, right? Breaking the next construct. And listen, I love this. Like, I was obsessed with the fix-it mentality because I just wanted to progress. What drew me to Lightwork Systems, right? And the reason I created it from some really amazing models, which we're going to go into, but the reason I view it as Lightwork Systems is that I needed to get out of always progressing, right? There was another thing to work on, another thing to fix, another problem. And so what I love about Lightwork Systems and what it's built on is celebrating the light that's already in you. And actually, because, I'm a bit obsessed with progression, I'll be honest. It fulfills that because you get the progression, but it's a really positive progression. I'm helping the light grow beyond me. I'm helping the new self that we're going to talk about grow, beyond who I am, right? Grow in depth, grow in height to becoming a greater, more dynamic experience to the point where I can experience absolute bliss all day, every single day, right? That's what we're looking for. And what that does is we don't just say, oh, I need to be happy as I am. We allow the progression to be in the light, right? The progression is the celebration instead of always having to fix something else. And finally, and this is a really big one, pardon me, is we want to have both a mind and a body integration. So many people who have gone into inner work or spirituality of some kind start going, well, it's all about the body, it's all about the feeling. And that's amazing when we've been so focused on just the mind for a long time, right? Often people bypass their body. And there's a moment and a period where we need to go, you know what? Let's give the body some real space, some love, some time to process emotions. And there's nothing wrong with that. We just don't want that to turn into the mind is bad. I've heard it many, many times with clients of, I don't want to listen to the thinking, right? I just want to turn off the thinking. But the reality is when we allow the parts in the mind and the parts in the body to really integrate, we can experience deep peace with a mind that's aligned within that, right? The way I look at it is if you have a really beautiful, peaceful river, but from that, your thinking arises from the river, not taking away from the river, but from the river. And what kind of thinking are you going to create? What might you even create in the world? And so a lot of my clients now, when they integrate their body and their mind, they're getting these wonderful ideas about how they can run their businesses or their sales teams in a really more harmonious, more beautiful way, because they've actually aligned their mind the same as their body to a point where they're working in unison to create a better internal and external reality, right? And that's what this is all about. This is freedom internally and externally. And I'm gonna, bang on about it, but this is a philosophy of integration, because integration equals freedom. In my mind, integration is the hero's journey. Okay. Now, we are very clear on what absolute freedom is, in my opinion, but what is it not, right? What is this not going to be? Well, we've touched on it already, but it's not going to be the only internal work, right? Some people can get stuck into, I'm just going to feel through everything, and then they don't go and work on their business or do the work for their sales teams that they're running. And they neglect their physical reality just for the internal. And they can get in really sticky positions where they're actually losing their external freedom, their finances, their resources, and they find themselves in really tricky situations. I've seen it, and it's not pretty. So this is definitely not something where we're going to bypass the external. We're doing deep internal work with a focus of including the external always, never resisting the external. If we have resistance on the external, that's not something where we just come into more internal. We actually go into that and we say, let's look at that too. Because we need to break through this internal, external block and allow it to come into deeper integration. Now, the second one is this isn't about being trapped in the external either, right? A lot of entrepreneurs, they come to me and they're trapped by their calendar in many ways, right? They have to always be on meetings. They don't feel free internally. They're trapped by their own resistance, their own stress. Their own internal world is the trap. So if the external world is a trap for you, right, where it's creating a lack of freedom, or the internal world is a trap where it's creating a lack of freedom, that's where we need to move into so we can really generate the absolute freedom that we want. That's what we're doing this for. And the final part, and this I'm not going to touch on too much in this video because it's such a big philosophy, but we're using the philosophy of integral, and integral relies on essentially not just one kind of inner work, right? So you have waking up, cleaning up, and growing up. And all that means waking up is more like meditation, cleaning up is more like psychotherapy, shadow work, allowing the kind of false constructs to break. And then growing up is growing up our developmental perspective and how we view the whole world, the lens of reality. So we're not going to go too deep into that. I highly recommend you looking into integral and the integral world, right? Because it's just an amazing idea of integrating everything in inner work and external. And Ken Wilber is a big part of that. But essentially what I mean by this is it's not just going to be just meditate or just do shadow work. The philosophy of Lightwork Systems actually is built on someone, his name's Kim Barter. He's an amazing mentor of mine. He has a system called ESR, Evolution of Shadow Resolution, which we'll go into a little bit. And that's what my work is primarily built on, along with some other hypnotherapy modalities and different styles of meditation. But what he did so amazingly is he uses the cleaning up, right, the shadow work, to then grow into waking up and developmental work. So the shadow work does all three at once because of the way he does it. Not all shadow work does this, it doesn't. If you just do cleaning up, you're not doing waking up and growing up. But if you do it in this way, you're doing all three at the same time. Again, I'm not going to touch on this too much. But let's get into what I mean by actually what Lightwork Systems is. And like I said, this is built on ESR, right? There's some of my own influence in this, but it's built on Kim Barter's system, okay? And so Lightwork Systems, first of all, it's about removing the shadows or the old constructs. And this is where we get into essentially this system, okay? And I just did another video that I just filmed just now, which we go much deeper into this system and what breaking through the old constructs looks like. But essentially, what we want to get to is a solid change or a permanent change, a consistent change. And the way we do that is we have to break free of trying to do the work on the symptoms and the trigger. So for example, if I'm experiencing a lot of stress, or let's say, actually, this is a good one, I'm experiencing real resistance to doing work on the business. So what do we have here? I'm going to use red for this one. I think red's a good one here. So the symptom is resistance. Now, we want to get really clear on what each one is because it makes a big difference to the actual healing process. So symptoms, resistance. And so if I want to break the resistance, because that's the kind of problem that we're experiencing, what's the trigger? Well, in this case, it's working on the business. I'm going to put business, biz. So the trigger is the thing that generates the symptom, right? Or the external trigger that makes us feel the symptom. So the business triggers the symptom. Now, this is where we go from doing healing that doesn't create permanent change to healing that does. Okay, it's underneath this bit, right? If we're doing healing here, a lot of people are really into like breath work or somatic work or meditation even. And these are all great things, right? They're not bad things at all. But if you're trying to do it to heal and make a permanent change to a pattern inside of you, and you're doing it on the resistance, like you're breathing through the resistance, you're just breathing through it, you're going to get a temporary relief, but the thing that created it to begin with is still there. So it's just going to generate again. So what I mean is you'll experience that relief, and then tomorrow or next week, you'll go back to the business and you'll feel the same resistance again. And you have to do it again and again and again. And it's not going to change, right? It's not going to change permanently. So we have to find what's the internal process that created the trigger which created the symptom. So in this situation, we're going to say that the internal process is a part of us, or we took on like an idea that business is stressful and bad. Okay. So I'm going to call it stressful and bad. Or actually, I'm going to change that a little bit. We took on an idea that we need to really perform. Whenever we're going to the business, we feel like we need to perform. And you might say, well, Cameron, of course I need to perform. It's my business, right? Yeah, that's fair enough. But what are we performing for? Okay, we ask ourselves, what do you mean by perform? The whole idea of the internal process is being curious. And we say, okay, I need to perform. That's kind of like top of internal process. If you imagine, where am I going to put this? Internal process as, a whole line, IP. So performance is like up here. It's kind of like the tippy top of the story. It's the story that you have most access to. But then you're going to get curious about what's in the middle and what's at the bottom of the internal process, right? What do you need to perform for, right? So we can see that performance, needing to perform, might create resistance because it feels like there's a lot of pressure on me. Okay? And we say, well, I need to perform because I need to do a good job. Okay? I need to do a good job. What happens if you do a good job? Well, then I feel like I'm in a good position. Okay? What happens if you're in a good position? Well, I make money. Okay? You make money. What happens if you make money? I feel safe. Huh. And this will be different for whoever you're speaking to, right? Or for you. But we've got down a little bit more to the middle or to the bottom to, I just want to be safe. I've got to perform to be safe. So it's not just I'm performing for the business, because yeah, of course, I'm going to do my best in the business, right? Of course I am. Like, I love this stuff. I'm going to do my best. But when it comes to I need to be safe, now we're talking about something that's much deeper and going to create much more of an emotional reaction, right? If my business is tied to my safety, it's going to be way more pressure. It's going to be way more resistance. Of course we're generating resistance, Of course we're doing this. And that's what we've got to think about with the internal process. It's like, what would make this make sense? Because the symptom and the trigger is never just happening randomly, right? It's never just like, you know what, the body and the mind woke up one day and we're like, let's make it really resistant for you to work on the business. No, there's nothing about that. It's working on the stories that are in the unconscious. And if the unconscious story is, I'm not safe, I need to perform to be safe, then it's going to generate symptoms and triggers in accordance with that story. And so when we break either the internal process here, right, we break that story, if you can imagine, we just start seeing that the story is an illusion. The story is a creation of our own meaning. Not that there can't be any truth within this story, but when we take on an idea and we just say that's everything, like just a general view of I need to perform to be safe. Okay, well maybe there was a time where you had to do a little bit of a good performance to make sure you were in a good spot, right? Maybe there is some partial truth to that. But if we take it on a blanket worldview and we put that over everything, which is what we often do with beliefs and with internal process, it's going to make it very difficult to move through life, and in this case, to run the business. Okay, and then if we take it back to our original goal of absolute freedom, it makes it difficult to have absolute freedom because we can't get the external freedom because we're not able to work on the business. Right, so it all ties back to this. Now, the next part is we want to get to the core seed. Okay, the core seed is simply when was the internal process created. Now, you can actually break the internal process like we spoke about just on its own. You can just see through it, you can break through it. There's some techniques for doing that. A great way is just questioning it. Like, what do you mean you have to perform to be safe? And often bringing it into your awareness, just like almost bringing it in front of you, creates cracks in it to the point where actually the internal process can break very easily on its own. But you can also take it one step further to what we call the core seed, and this is when was the internal process created. So when did you take on the idea that you need to perform to be safe? And this gets to different types of shadow, but the one we're going to work with today is introject, which is where you've taken on a belief or a feeling from the outside world and you've taken it on as your own. And so in this example, let's say you took on the idea that you need to perform to be safe from your dad. And so what do we do in that situation? Right, if we took on the story from dad, we simply allow it to go back to dad, right? And this is symbolic. He's not actually taking anything from us. We're just allowing it in our internal world, just symbolically giving it back to him. And what's going to emerge, and this takes us back here into the Lightwork systems, is the new self or the light. You can use whatever word is more comfortable for you. I like light. It really resonates with me, but some people, some of my clients just prefer they view it as their new self, okay? That feels more concrete for them, which is, you know, it's your words. It doesn't really matter. And so the new self emerges, right? Why does the new self emerges? Because when you break or give away the old construct, right, we're allowing it to break or allowing it to be let go of or given away, there's going to be a space. So if we imagine the old thing was here and we gave that away, so now there's a space. Now, in that space, this is really, really important, right? In this space in your consciousness, oh, I'm having a bit of a problem with these pens, aren't I? Is we don't want to add anything, okay? A lot of people make a mistake here if they want to remove the old belief and then replace it with a new one, right? They've thought of a great belief that they want to add. But what's happening when you add a new belief is from your current kind of I, what you think of the world, you're adding the new belief, right? From your limited perception, okay? And so you're adding something onto it, but it's completely unnecessary. What's actually better is we just witness the space and we see what emerges, whatever emerges on its own organically. And whatever emerges on its own organically, that is our new self, our light. Because if you could imagine, let's say you took this on when you were 7 years old. Let's say you never took on this story. You never took on the idea that you need to perform to be safe. It just was never in your idea of reality, right? Well, what's going to happen? You're just going to grow up without that, right? You might have more confidence. You might not take on a burden of performance. You might feel more joy, more flow, more peace when you're running a business or where you're just engaging in life. And so we're just doing that as adults, right? We're just doing that now instead of when we were 6 or 7. And we're just allowing, what's the version of you that never took on the old belief, that never took on the old construct? And that's all this is. We're finding that version and we're calling it the new self of a light, but reality, it's just the organic self. It's just who you really are. And so we let that emerge, and it will really often emerge somatically, right? Just an experience where we're really feeling into it. It might be a lightness or a sense of peace. And we can add labels to it because they can help us grasp it a little bit better. But as we grow, we're actually going to have less labels, and we're just going to notice the somatic experience without putting anything on it, because it actually allows it to grow even bigger. And so what's going to happen is the somatic experience is going to grow, and then from there it's just going to develop cognition, your mind, like we said, this is body and mind, somatic and thinking, right? Somatic and cognitive. And so it's going to grow somatically. And then the mind, like we mentioned with that still lake, is going to be growing from the still lake, right? Or going to be growing from the new self, the light. Everything now is going to be in alignment, in accordance with the new self, with the light, if we nurture and celebrate it and allow it to grow. This is where we move from shadow work. This is a system of shadow work, evolution of shadow work resolution, to light work. Right? And this is where we get into light work systems, because now we're working with the new self, we're working with the light, whatever we want to call it, and we're just allowing it to grow. We're allowing it to do a number of things, to strengthen so that it becomes so robust as our new reality that all the symptoms that were being generated from the old shadow just fall away and are replaced with the new experience. Maybe that's a deep sense of peace or joy or playfulness, or all of them at the same time. And number 2, we're allowing it to grow into every single area of our life, to the point where, it's maybe this, we're talking about this in business, but now it might show up in your relationship, or it might show up just even as you go to sleep. You get to feel that deep sense of peace and wake up with that, right? And then it's also going to grow in height. And this is actually where, if we remember in Integral, we talked about waking up, cleaning up, and growing up. When it grows up in height, not only are we going to have the waking up, where we get deeper state experiences, but also the height, where often we have developmental growth, like literally psychological development will come through this if we let the light grow on its own, right? If we let the new self grow on its own. And then this takes us into the final part of the light work systems, which where we want to allow systems to emerge. And what I found with clients is we need at least 2 of these. So we usually go through this process twice. And so we do this with one shadow, we grow it, we allow it to get really, really strong. And then more often than not, we have a number of shadows, so we work on something else. And then we get 2 of these lights, or 2 of these new selves that emerge. And then what we do is we allow them to both, come up together in the practice. And very often they almost come together and they create their own system, okay? What I mean by this is the old shadows or constructs that were kind of creating our suffering, creating the problems, the symptoms we were experiencing, they're working in systems too. Someone might find that they feel that they need to perform to be safe, but what's making it harder to break that is they also might feel that in order to be loved, they need to, act a certain way, right? They have all these different shadows that are working together, which makes the shadow as a whole, or the constructs as a whole, more robust and tougher to break. But when we break it, we can do the same with light work, or with light and the new self, where we allow them to come together and we allow them to actually work with one another right? So let's say the first new self came up and it was just this deep sense of innate safety, right? Just real deep safety within yourself. And then we allow the second one to emerge from a completely different issue. And maybe it's a real playfulness, right? Part of you that's just like really thriving and really alive in the world. And so we allow the safety light, the safety new self, and the playfulness new self to come together. And very often we'll generate new qualities because we're doing this idea of emergence where the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. So actually, if I put this down now, the two parts coming together create something bigger, right? It's not that like they come together and they just stay like this. They actually get vastly bigger and they start generating more of their own qualities and they start growing beyond what they could be before. And this is something that I've played with a lot with my own work and with clients. And it's also something that I haven't seen people talk about, where when you spend so much time with the light, it starts to break a lot of the other shadows. And so when I work with a client, what we'll be doing, just got to pick up these pens, is work with one or two shadows to get the initial lights. And then what will happen is we'll literally work with those lights for a good number of weeks, and it just starts creating so many changes in their entire life, right? In their business, in their relationships, how they relate to friends, how they just feel in general, right? Yeah, I'm going to go talk about a little bit of an example in a moment. But essentially, we end up doing a lot less shadow work. This is why we remove the fix-it mentality, because we're always progressing, right? But we're not having to do more shadow work and more fixing. We're not having to go through that old process again and again. We can do, but we need to do it a lot less because we're letting the light do the work. We're letting the light, like a tidal wave, just flush away the impurity, flush away the distortions in the mind, in the consciousness. But let's go through a little bit of an example and see if we can explain this, even better. Because that's what I'm trying to do here, trying to articulate this stuff, and it's kind of subjective in a lot of ways, but it's really powerful, and I want you guys to understand, to be able to use this, and to see the power of it. So this is a client of mine. He runs 7-figure sales teams. So he's kind of got the external freedom down, right? He can live wherever he wants. He's got tremendous amount of resources in money and among other things and time. But he was experiencing two things. Number one, he was internally trapped, where he was experiencing a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety, and a lot of pressure. And it was really tearing him apart. That's why we ended up doing work together, because it got to a point where it was actually just creating a lot of suffering in his life, and it was just not enjoyable to have his experience, even when he was being so successful. Now, the other thing was he actually was still limited slightly externally, because he was crushing it with the sales teams, but he wants to do events, or he wanted to do events. He's doing events now. But he felt limited, right? There was something inside of him that felt like he needed to do more, right? He needed to achieve more here before he could do events, even when he was seeing guys who were actually less qualified than him in a lot of ways in what they had done in sales, running events, speaking. But he would hold himself to this impossible standard, and it was stopping him from actually taking the jump and doing the events. And so he was experiencing a kind of external limitation here. And so what was our goal for the work? The goal in my mind was absolute freedom, but for him, what that meant was removing the internal trappedness, the internal stress, pressure that was getting in his way of enjoying life, enjoying his business, or running his sales teams. And then also removing the limitation that was stopping him from really taking that next step to actually go and run events and speak on stage. And so What happened is we worked with two of these things, two of these shadow cycles, until we found the internal process and the core seed for each of these, and they were slightly different. So the internally trapped one was more a sense of this pressure he had taken on. I'm not going to go into too much detail. And the storyline of I need to take on this pressure so that I'm not like abandoned or not rejected, this kind of thing. So we broke through that one first. And this just really wonderful spaciousness emerged. It started to emerge in his body, in his mind, in how he showed up in his calls, how he showed up for his team, and just in general, even how it showed up for his relationship. And so this internally trapped construct, the light that came from it made such a huge difference. We spent weeks with it just because there was so much richness in it, and he was just enjoying it so much. We just kept going with it until it was like, all right, cool, this is stable now. This is my everyday experience of this deep spaciousness, this real bliss in a lot of ways, but a very grounded bliss. It wasn't taking him out of being able to run his teams. In fact, it was making it easier because he didn't have the stress and the pressure. And he was able to do things like move around his calendar, start setting firmer boundaries, which gave him the time to even do the deep work, which his teams are actually doing even better now. Now, the next one was this external limitation, where he had almost projected so much power outside of him, of his authority and his confidence, that it was quite different. It was more of a projection. So this was an introject, which we've spoken about, but another type of shadow is projection. And so it was about really re-owning the projection. And so we allowed him to re-own the projection, re-own the confidence, re-own the authority and the power. And when he did that, the core seed, and we grew that inner authority, that inner confidence, right, along with the spaciousness that was already there. This is when we moved into Lightwork systems, because we now had two. And what started to happen is he just started to feel like, oh yeah, I can go and do it. I can go and speak on stage. I can go and run the events. No problem. No problem at all. And he started doing it literally that weekend. He just set up something small and he just built it from there. And now he's crushing it. But it only happened when we broke the constructs that were creating these problems in the first place, right? Because both of these, the pressure that he was experiencing was a symptom. The limitation was basically a symptom as well. So when we broke these and we noticed the light, we were able to really grow that. And then what happened is we solved these two issues basically. And then we allowed the two lights, or the two new selves, to come together to create a system, right? And we moved into Lightwork systems. And so what that did is it started to generate change beyond just the original problems, right? They were solved. And so he's just experiencing a deep state of bliss all day. He noticed that he was having a real deep sense of security, like that authority emerged into a deep security. And so he's just become an incredible leader for his teams, and now working on some even bigger opportunities that weren't available for him when we started working together. And more importantly, we kind of achieved that aim of absolute freedom, because not only did he have the inner freedom, he was experiencing that real spaciousness every single day, that real bliss. He wasn't experiencing pressure, stress, and resistance, but also he was externally limitless, right? He wasn't holding onto these limits that he had to do this, this, and that before he could go and run events. And we're still working together because we've got some more things. He's quite ambitious. He wants to work on new things. And what's cool is the limitlessness has been showing up in his events, but it also starts making him think about, oh, maybe I can do this. Maybe he's going to even start another business as well. All because he stopped putting the authority outside of him and started to re-own that, re-own the power, and really just show up as his most absolute freedom, liberated version of himself, right? I didn't add anything. All we did was just find the version underneath the old constructs, the version underneath the distortions in the mind, and find who he really is.